So hey guys, welcome to a new movie review. Today I'm actually talking about a documentary that you could stream right now for free with your Netflix subscription. This film is exclusive to Netflix. It's a documentary you can watch on there. It's called Bob Ross, Happy Accidents, Betrayal, and Greed. This documentary is about the career of Bob Ross, the famous painter on television, the one who's known for his happy little trees and for doing his nature paintings and just landscape paintings and just almost anything you can find in nature, he's probably done in a painting at some point in time. Throughout the late 80s and early 90s, and the early 80s, I would say too, he was really well known for doing paintings on television. He could get an entire painting done over the course of 30 minutes. Obviously, he planned things out. He did a painting beforehand, so he would just follow off of that painting while doing the show and things like that. So it's just kind of a little bit of a backstory on that for those who might not be as familiar with Bob Ross's work. But this documentary covers his career. It covers kind of the good and the bad of his career. The reason why the title is as long as it is, that happy accidents, betrayal, and greed thing. It does kind of show kind of the bad things he had to face, kind of how people were trying to buy his name and buy his company, buy Bob Ross Incorporated around the time of his death and things like that. This documentary also covers his son's take on the whole thing. They did track down Steve Ross for this documentary. They also kind of give takes from people who directed episodes of the Bob Ross show and things like that, as well as directing The Joy of Painting and all the other shows that he was associated with when he was alive. Really interesting documentary. Highly recommend it. But let's talk about some negatives and some positives and negatives for this documentary on Netflix. So for my positives and negatives of Bob Ross, Happy Accidents, Betrayal, and Greed, very long title. I'm actually going to talk about the title here in a little bit later in the video. But for the most part, for my positives, it's a very informative documentary. I've been a big Bob Ross fan for a while now. I kind of like to watch his videos from time to time, kind of like late at night when it's like a night where I can't sleep very well, or I just need to have a chance to relax, or if I had a long day at work. A lot of his videos tend to really relax me and things like that. So for first and foremost, like I said, it's a very informative documentary. A lot of things you'll learn about Bob Ross here, whether it's his personal life, things he had to deal with behind the scenes, things he had to deal with regarding his company, where it was going to go after he passed away, kind of where the merchandising went when he was alive and where it went after he passed away, how his son got the rights for certain things, how other people got the rights to other things. The documentary explores all those things. It's very informative. You will learn a lot about Bob Ross, whether you've been a fan of him for a long time or you've just found out about his work over the past couple of years. Another positive with this documentary is the use of Bob Ross's dialogue while he was making his paintings, because during the show he was always talking about how he was always impressed with his son's work, or how he had like a personal experience with his brother and how the painting kind of connects to that. What they did is they took things that were kind of behind the scenes that were going on at the time, kind of tracked down the episodes, like when the show was kind of like, say, getting forced off the air or something along that line. They would use dialogue from those episodes of things that were going on at the time and how Bob incorporated them into those episodes, and they would use that in the documentary to kind of give us a slight insight of what was going on with Bob's life while that painting was being made and things like that. And so what they did is they incorporated that dialogue with some of the situations happening in the documentary to kind of tie in with how Bob was feeling around that time that certain situation was going on with his show and things like that. Another positive I had with the documentary is what they did is with certain narratives of the story, when whether it was his son or somebody who worked with Bob Ross or one of his directors or producers or so forth, when they were talking about something where obviously they wouldn't have photographs or video or anything to kind of depict that scenario, what they did is they got a series of paintings that kind of look like something out of Bob Ross's Joy of Painting show. And obviously they're not done by Bob Ross because he was more so known for his nature stuff. But this is more so like behind the scenes stuff. They did like a lot of shadow figures. I think there's a scene where they talked about how Bob's wife was talking to his son in the bathroom, and he was like smoking a cigarette or something at the time, and they were depicting in the painting kind of her sitting on the toilet talking to the son and things like that. They do all that through a series of paintings for the things that they don't have photos and videos for, or archive footage of any kind for. And I like how they did that. I like how it wasn't just the person explaining the scenario. They actually had paintings to go along with certain scenarios that might have been hard to get footage of for this documentary. I also like all the then and now show celebrities kind of showing where they're at now for those who are still around, where the studio was, what the studio looks like now that they filmed all the Joy of Painting episodes in, all the locations. I think they show Bob Ross's home at one point and kind of where that's at now. Um, Obviously, like where the son's at now, where the second wife of Bob Ross is at now, and things like that. They do show a lot of then and now. They show a lot of people who were guest stars on the Joy of Painting, like Steve Ross, who also got to paint on the show, other painters that showed up on the show that Bob kind of allowed to do paintings on his show and things like that. They show the people that are still around and kind of what they look like now, what they've been doing over the years, and kind of how Joy of Painting either positively influenced their life or how it negatively influenced their life and things like that. So they really show all the then and now locations and the then and now guest stars who are also on the show. And it was really cool to see. It was really cool to see in particular Steve Ross show up and kind of give his take on everything, because I think he wasn't taking any kind of publicity or interviews for a long time. So it's kind of cool that they managed to talk him into doing this documentary and finally getting open with some of the things that were going on with Bob Ross's life, as well as his own life, and how the two kind of intertwined with each other. But for my negatives of Bob Ross, Happy Accidents, Betrayal, and Greed, one of my big negatives, and I kind of noticed this online too on the Rotten Tomatoes reviews, is the third act of this documentary is very messy. It's kind of trying to do a lot of things at once. It's just all over the place. That leads into my other negative too, where there's just too many last minute vague details on certain things. They really try to do kind of the loss of the company, how Steve lost the lawsuit and all this other stuff. They really try to cram way too much in that third act, and it's all negative stuff too. So it goes from this really positive documentary, and yeah, they cover kind of the last days of Bob Ross and how tragic that was and things like that too, but some of the last minute details stuff, specifically with the lawsuit of who owns the rights for the company and things like that, it's just crammed in that third act a little too much. It's just a little too messy, a lot going on at once. It's just, and there's just too many vague details too. Everything about that third act, there's just not enough details on certain things. So that third act of this film is very, very messy. And then that goes into my next negative point too, kind of like what I was saying at the beginning of the video, how I was going to say I was going to come back to this part, but I don't like the title of this documentary, the whole Bob Ross, Happy Accidents, Betrayal, and Greed. I think something like Bob Ross and the Not So Happy Accidents, I think, would have been perfectly fine for something like this. I don't like the title of this documentary at all. I don't know who kind of gave the green light to the title for this over at Netflix. I really don't like the title of this documentary at all. I think it's way too long and really could have been something more along the line of something that Bob Ross would have approved of if he was still around and things like that. So not a big fan of the title of this documentary either. And then my last negative of this documentary too is I thought more time could have been spent with Bob Ross's troubles in real life. There's a part where they cover a potential affair that he might have had at one point. There's a part where they cover kind of his final days and how he still wanted to be on television. He tried to do a spin-off show for kids before he passed away that was separate from Joy of Painting. How he tried to wear a fake wig while he was trying to overcome the cancer and get treatments for that and things like that. I would have liked to have seen more of what they could have possibly known about Bob's take on the whole thing. Yeah, clearly he wanted to work and kind of live out his final days the most he could. But there's just a lot of things regarding the troubles of his life I thought they kind of glossed over a little bit too much. Yes, this is a very happy documentary. Yes, it is. There's a lot of things in this that cover a lot of the good parts about Bob Ross's career and all that kind of stuff. But there's just a lot of things where he was so good about covering up kind of the bad stuff going on in his life on television. Like he was able to focus on the good stuff. It would have been interesting to see kind of the stuff that we weren't able to see on television as much some more. I thought that part felt a little short-handed, and it's just something where after watching the documentary, I kind of wish I'd known a little bit more about that part, about Bob Ross's life and career while watching this documentary. But overall, I'm going to give Bob Ross Happy Accidents, Betrayal, and Greed. I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. I think it's a very well-made documentary. I think there's a lot of good things about it. But like I said, it does have a messy third act. It does try to cram a lot of last-minute details all at once in that third act. There are very vague details in the third act as well. I'm not a big fan of the title for this. I don't like what Netflix titled this documentary very much. And I also thought more time could have been spent with Bob Ross's troubles, so we can kind of know more behind the camera of what was going on with his life outside of the stuff that made him happy and things like that. What were the stuff that didn't make him so happy either? So I would give this documentary an 8.5 out of 10. I recommend Bob Ross' Happy Accidents, Betrayal, and Greed. It's a good documentary. Just go into it knowing that it's not a perfect documentary either. There is some problems with it, but it is good enough where I would highly recommend that you see it.